Hey, Eddie. Thank you for joining me for today's weekly update. Today I'm joined by Dr. Jose Romero, Secretary of the Department of Health. I also have Secretary Key of the Department of Education, and today Misha Martin is here from the Department of Human Services to respond to any questions on a particular topic that I'll raise. And today we'll go through the case report a little bit later. I want to talk about our booster shots and information related to them. But I want to start on something that's not related to COVID directly, but it's related to border security, and it's related to the impact on current border policies that we are experiencing here in Arkansas. And DHS has drawn my attention to this because we are now seeing a number of unaccompanied minors that are coming into Arkansas to be housed with their sponsors. In fact, in the last federal fiscal year, which ended September 30th, the federal government released 672 unaccompanied minors to sponsors in Arkansas. Now, let me underscore that number, 672. Now, when that happens, the federal government should, through their HHS, their Office of Refugee Settlement, will vet the sponsor, make sure that they can handle the unaccompanied minor, and then that unaccompanied minor will be located with that sponsor. What we have seen is that the sponsors are not properly vetted, and that in many instances we're having to take custody of those unaccompanied minors that have been housed with sponsors that are really not properly vetted and qualified and responsible enough to care for these unaccompanied minors. We've seen an increase in the number of calls to our Arkansas Child Abuse Hotline, reference to these unaccompanied minors. And we're taking an increasing number of unaccompanied minors into custody. And in fact, the last month we've had 7 unaccompanied minors who were responsible in the house of a sponsor being brought into DHS custody because of the conditions in which they were living and the lack of care of the sponsor. Some of the children have been abandoned, and others are living with sponsors in conditions that are deplorable. Under state law, DHS has an obligation and a responsibility, and everybody would want to take care of these children, to protect the health and safety of those children, regardless of their immigration status. When an unaccompanied minor comes into DHS custody, we get information from the federal government, but the federal government does not take the minor back into custody if the sponsor is not doing their work. And so what we see is that unaccompanied minors are not eligible for Medicaid or other federal benefits, and this means that whenever they come into DHS custody, we not only have the responsibility for them from a moral standpoint, from a care standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint. And so the taxpayers pick up the tab for medical, behavioral health, and trauma care, shelter and care costs, and the cost of placing the minor in an appropriate setting. This has been brought to my attention. It is a great concern to me, and so I have a letter that I am sending to Secretary of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C., expressing my concern as mirrored by the concern of other governors, and referencing everything that I just talked about of the number of unaccompanied minors that are in the homes of sponsors that are not being responsible. And I'm asking for a meeting with HHS. I'm asking for a understanding of the vetting process and an improvement of the vetting process. We want to do our responsibility, but we want the federal government to do its responsibility as well, and to make sure that when an unaccompanied minor comes in the United States, that they have a sponsor and that they're properly vetted and they're going to be properly cared for. Obviously, there's other policy changes that ought to be made, but this is a start for it, and this letter will be made available to you. The second issue that I wanted to raise today, after discussions with Dr. Romero, we are seeing a need for making the booster shot more available. And so let's go to the first graph, and you'll see that this is the current recommendations of CDC in reference to our booster shots. For Pfizer, Moderna, those who are 65 years and older are eligible for the, are recommended for the booster. If you're 18 and over, then you have to be in a long-term care setting, have underlying health conditions, or working in a high-risk setting. And it should be 6 months after the second shot. For the Johnson & Johnson, it's the same if you're 18 over, but theirs is 2 months after the first shot. That is the current recommendations of CDC, and what we're finding is that we want more people to get their booster shot, and that this is somewhat confusing and limiting as to the eligibility of those that ought to be getting their booster shot. And so in consultation with the Department of Health, we're changing that to go to the next slide, and this is the recommendations and the policy of our state of Arkansas through our Department of Health. For Pfizer and Moderna, those who are 18 and over, go get the shot. There's not any limitations on that. Obviously, you should be 6 months after the second shot, but we want you to get the booster, because as the data indicates that the effectiveness of the vaccine deteriorates over time, and so that's the reason for the booster, and we want to make sure everybody that's 18 and over is eligible and is encouraged to get the booster. And the same Johnson & Johnson, of course, that's 2 months after the first shot. Go get your booster if you are 18 and over. So this is a change in policy that we're implementing here in Arkansas. I think it'll eliminate some confusion, and it'll also encourage everyone across the board that meets this criteria to go get the booster shot. That's the best protection from the virus and from serious health consequences. And then let's go on to the case report for today. Of course, this is just following the weekend, and so these numbers are very low, but 151 new cases. The good news is that our active cases are down 351. So that's a big drop in active cases. It's the first drop we've had in a number of days, so we're glad to see that. Regrettably, we still have 12 deaths from the coronavirus. Vaccinations, what I want to draw your attention to is that the total, if you look at those individuals partially immunized and fully immunized, we're at 1.7 million here in the state, which is getting to be a good number. We want to continue to increase that as rapidly as we can. That is the best protection. And then hospitalizations are steady at 282, but this is a lower number than we've had in some time. You can see the ventilators is up 1. And next, this is a graph that shows the difference in age group for the 7-day case rate per 10,000. And so the blue line at the top is the age 0 to 4, and then you have the 5 to 11 category is green, and then the age 12 to 18 is the lighter blue. And actually the younger one is the red, I guess. And what I want to draw your attention to is that on the end you see in those age categories that you see a little bit of an uptick there, and that's what we want to watch. That this is different than what we've seen before in terms of the breakdown of the age group. And then I asked the Department of Health to make a comparison between the vaccination uptake for the 12 to 15 and then the 5 to 11-year-olds. You can see the 5 to 11 is increasing gradually, but it's not at the same rate that we saw in the 12 to 15-year-old. That's hopefully we'll be able to increase the understanding of that, the confidence in it, because as you can see from the age group that is susceptible to getting the virus, we see an increase in those younger age groups as well. I believe that we can end with again, the reminder that of those that have the COVID virus, 86% are not vaccinated. If you look at hospitalizations, 88% of those in the hospitals because of COVID have not been vaccinated. And of those that die, 86% have not received the vaccination. That should be a reminder that it keeps us safer, and it is something that is beneficial to bring us out of this. With this, let me invite Dr. Romero, and then followed by our Secretary of Education. I know he has some things to say in terms of our schools. Dr. Romero.
Thank you, Governor. So adding on to what was said by the Governor, we are starting to see what looks like a trend upward, and the final days of last week continue to show the number of cases that were increasing. Of concern to us is the number of cases that are starting to be seen in that younger age group, in particular that age group that now we have a vaccine for, which is the 5 to 11, and then the age group below that, the very young ones that we don't have a vaccine for. Last week we observed an outbreak in a school district, school in Conway. Those cases continue to increase. The overwhelming majority are in students, and we are observing what we did not observe last year, which is intra-school, that is within the school, transmission. So we're seeing transmission among students within the school, and that is a product of not having those children immunized and relaxing the mask mandate or the mask requirements. So I want to stress to the parents that even though there is no requirement, that a way to protect your child is to use the mask, and to proceed with immunizing that age group in order to protect them. This is not a benign disease. This is not as mild as the flu as people are giving the misinformation to say. This can have very significant consequences, hospitalizations, and deaths, including longer-term complications like the inflammatory disease that these children have and possibly the long COVID that's been described for adults. At this time, we've immunized 4.2% of our population between 5 and 11, and 51.2% of our population between 12 and 18 years has received at least one dose. With that, and one more thing then, with our Test to Stay program, 65 schools have now enrolled in that and are up and running from what I understand. So I'll stop here and turn it back over to, to Secretary Key.
My remarks will follow the theme of the Governor and Dr. Romero. When we looked at the number of cases, active cases in the public schools on November 1, we had dipped below the 900 count mark. Since then, we have seen, as we are seeing with the community cases, a steady increase. And as of last Thursday report, we are now nearing 1,200 cases. It follows with what we saw last year, that in the weeks following Halloween, there seemed to be an increase in the number of cases identified in the schools. And again, that is happening now this year, pending the report that should come out later today from the Health Department. That gives us a reason to say, let's continue with caution. Our school districts, many of them have policies set where they're looking at the number of cases in the school to determine what they do with their mask policies. Those are things that we want schools to continue to use good judgment We want parents to continue to use good judgment. We want to take the precautions, all the precautions that we can. And just a reminder, I believe Dr. Amaro, a student that started the vaccine regimen now, would be able to complete that regimen before the end of the year and then be able to come back in January for the new semester completely immunized through that vaccine regimen. So we just encourage our parents and our school leaders to continue work together to make sure that we can continue a safe school year and a successful school year.
Thank you, Johnny. With that, we'll take any questions.
On the new booster shot recommendation, is that something that you've talked to like federal officials about? And if so, did they give you an indication of, do they have any issue with the state having different recommendations from the federal recommendation?
Through Dr. Romero, we have advised the CDC of our change in position on that, so they're aware of that. I know that CDC is reevaluating where they are, but we wanted on this Monday to clear up any confusion and make sure that we're marching forward and encouraging the booster vaccination and providing clarity that everyone 18 plus is eligible for it.
One way or another, whether, they agree with this idea?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of the CDC. I don't want to speak for them. Dr. Romero, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's exactly correct.
So I think you just need to wait for anything that comes from the CDC, but we did make them aware of our change in position.
Also, just wondering on that, so are there not going to be like boxes you have to check anymore saying, I'm 65 and older, or I have a high-risk job? Are those forms going to be different now?
They should be. And so it should be a much simpler process. We want to make sure it's easy and accessible for everyone to get their booster shot with the minimum burden and confusion. And so, this is a change in policy today. It might take a little while to make sure that all the people on the ground is aware of that and changes their paperwork, but that is the change in policy.
And I know you said that the uptake for ages 5 to 11 for the vaccine is slower than we saw with the last child age group. Are there any plans to encourage that to maybe ramp up?
Yes, actually, we want to make sure our advertising is specifically directed to that age group. So we want to be able to market and build confidence in that age group, as well as making sure that our schools make that available as well. Both of you make comment on that?
So we have vaccine available and are able to have school-based clinics for those schools that want it. We will deliver to the site and vaccinate there if necessary. And again, the vaccine is available throughout the state, through the local health units, through pharmacies, and it is available. So parents, please take advantage of that.
The letter you're sending to Washington about unaccompanied minors, what kind of changes are you hoping to see in that vetting process of sponsors?
As you can see from the letter, we want to have a very constructive discussion. First of all, I want to understand what their vetting process is. And secondly, I want them to hear firsthand from our experience on the ground. They need to understand what we are finding in their vetting process, and that the sponsors are largely not working and not properly vetted. That's resulting in this burden on the state with over 600 unaccompanied minors coming in. Again, a startling number of those that are in positions that no child should be in. So that's the conversation I want to have. We want to see the vetting process improved. In addition, I'm very concerned that, as you look at the unaccompanied minors coming across the border, some are being trafficked, some are being misused, and we hope that there can be a change in policy. One of the most important things this administration can do is change some of their border policies, because that impacts these children, and it impacts states as well, but the children are first, and This is not good what's happening.
Are there any specific changes you want to see to the vetting process? Anything specifically that you think is falling through?
Well, yeah, they're not doing a good job. They're placing them with people that have no sense of responsibility. Now, that's not 100% across the board, but that's a startling number that we're seeing, that the child is abandoned. That's not a proper vetting, and we actually, Misha, why don't you come up and speak to this, because I know you've had some conversations about this, and you've got firsthand knowledge about what you've seen with some of these minors that we've had to take custody of.
So just to further answer your question, as you'll probably see in research, the federal government does have some vetting process, but clearly it is not working completely, as the governor mentioned. So we want to make sure that we know that the youth that are coming into our state are placed with someone safe and appropriate, and that home study and background check was properly done. And we need better coordination between the federal government and us here to know, who are these youth, where are they placed, and how can we work together to make sure that they're safe.
Also mentioned that calls for reporting child abuse went up in the, I think you said past year or so. And I was wondering if you knew if those calls were directly related to this sponsorship, because I know in some states, just from people being at home more, child abuse calls went up unrelated.
Well, this is specifically, my reference was that the number of calls to the child abuse hotline have increased in reference to unaccompanied minors.
And I'll just say, as the governor mentioned, we've had 7 specific cases that I have been involved with in the last month. And so at the department, we have a plan to better track those calls that are coming into the hotline where there is an unaccompanied minor involved. So we're going to be tracking and monitoring so that we get a better handle on how many of the youth that we're serving are unaccompanied minors who have been placed here by HHS.
Let me go to those that might be on the line remotely. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Governor, this is Andrew with AP. Just wanted to check in on special session plans, if you've gotten any closer to deciding on a date for that, and also where do things stand in terms of looking at issues other than tax cuts for the session?
And the answer is yes, there's progress made, because we've worked very hard with our legislative partners in drafting the tax reduction bill, and so that's in a form now that can be distributed to the members, and so we can start gaining the support for it. But there's no date that's set, because I want the members to have an opportunity to review the bill completely and make sure we have majority support for it. In terms of the other issues, we will report that down the road. I don't think there's anything startling that will be on there, some technical fixes, but we will outline that whenever we release the proclamation. And in terms of timing, there's no news there, because I want to make sure that we have the support and that there's an understanding as to how this session would proceed. Next question.
Governor Hutchinson, this is Emma Claybrook with 4029 News. President Biden is set to sign the bipartisan infrastructure bill in just a few minutes, and I was wondering if you knew of any specific benefits that will directly affect Arkansans.
Oh, absolutely. I do support the bipartisan infrastructure bill. This is something that we've worked for through the Trump administration and now the Biden administration, and to see it become law is good for Arkansas. There should be, I believe it's close to $4 billion in benefits that will come to this state in terms of hard infrastructure, of highways, in terms of water projects, in terms of broadband expansion. So all of these are of great benefit to us. And I know some are concerned, well, this will lead to the larger human infrastructure or spending bill, which I'm opposed to, but let's not let that hinder us getting something that we've wanted to have done in a bipartisan way from the Trump administration through this administration. So this will bring good benefit to the state of Arkansas, and I'm delighted to see that it passed and going to be signed into law today. Next question.
The holidays are starting to come up, and I know today we saw a decline for the first time after a recent increase in COVID cases. Are you worried at all about another spike? As Secretary Key said, we saw a little bit of a spike after Halloween.
Well, sure, and the concern comes from what we've seen in Europe and what we've seen here in the United States with even states that have been heavily vaccinated. You see an increase in their cases. Now, the great news is you aren't seeing a simultaneous dramatic increase in hospitalizations or serious adverse health consequences, because the vaccine is out there much more predominantly than it has been in the past. And so while I'm concerned about the cases, because that interrupts education, it interrupts work, it interrupts life, and so the infections in and of themselves is not helpful to a rebounding community that wants to come out of the pandemic. But we're in much better position than we were before, because our active cases are way down, our hospitalizations are way down, and our vaccination rates are up. And so while we want to sound an alert to everyone that we're still got to get through the winter, we do want to be put it in perspective that we're in much better position because our vaccination is out. Dr. Merrill, do you have anything else to add there? I think with that, thank you all very much for the questions today, and everybody will be available if there's anything to follow up on. Thank you very much.